and welcome to this special Founding Fuel conversation. My name is N.S. Ramnath, and I am a senior editor at Founding Fuel. The startup ecosystem in India has undergone a remarkable transformation over the years, evolving from its humble beginnings to become a driving force in global innovation and economic growth. Rahul Chandra, Managing Director of Arkham Ventures, has been at the forefront of this evolution in India. His experience in the Indian startup landscape dates back to the late 1990s. His deep insights into the startup world are captured in his recent book, Tightrope to the Moon: How Mega Founders Win the Startup War. This compelling work has valuable lessons for aspiring founders and investors alike. At Founding Fuel, we recently featured an excerpt from the book highlighting a crucial concept: the key. The key is basically the idea that even among the founding team, a few members keep the spirit of the startup alive. It's one of the many ideas in the book, and we wanted to host a conversation with Rahul to build on the ideas and gain a broader perspective on the startup ecosystem. For that, we are joined by our Founding Fuel contributor, Devangshu Dutta, Chief Executive of Third Eyesight and Managing Partner of PVC Partners. Devangshu has an extensive background in consulting and working with startups across the various sectors and brings with him a wealth of knowledge to our discussion. This promises to be a stimulating chat. So, without much ado, over to you, Devangshu.
Ram, and welcome to the Founding Fuel community, to what promises to be a very interesting conversation. Rahul compliments on another book, and the moon seems to be a recurring theme. You covered the VC's journey in your previous book, The Moonshot Game, which reflected upon your experience as an investor. This book, on the other hand, focuses on the founder guiding the journey to the moon, and I'm sure it will be of great interest to current and aspiring founders. So just picking up on that, almost about 120 years ago, perhaps, the author George Bernard Shaw wrote in Man and Superman, "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable man." Man here we should read as man or woman. You mentioned in your book the key founder as a defining factor in startup success, as a nuclear reactor, as the planet with the maximum mass in the solar system, and as the keeper of the spark, while the other co-founders build on that spark. So could you talk us through your conversations of teasing out the key founder within the team and how crucial it is, and when is it best for co-founders to themselves realize this balance of relationship amongst themselves? As you described the key entrepreneurs as unhinged people cut from a different cloth, and the fact that the moon's name in Latin is Luna, which also lunatic comes from. So where are these people, these unhinged people? How do you identify them when you're talking to founding teams?
Very well put, Devanshu. Thank you for starting with that quote. It's one of my favorite quotes when I think about founders. I did not actually know it was from Man and Superman. And I think it fits in so well with the model of founders that we see. And the premise of the book obviously comes from the fact that for me, I have a ringside view of many startup journeys over the last 25 years. Personally met at least 3,000 founders. Beyond that, I've lost count. But the common observation that I've had is that personally, when I came to evaluating the team, which is really what you're valuing, and we can chat more about why everything centers around the team. The mistake I was making was that I was seeing it as a composite. I was not seeing it as, in cruder terms, a cart being pulled by a horse, but a very composite piece nevertheless, but there are two very distinct parts to this body of forces. In Newtonian concepts, there would be somebody who's dragging it forward, pulling it forward. And then what is getting pulled forward is also very important, because that also has to move with free flow. The key is something that I started noticing about 10 years back in terms of, and it came from seeing startups actually run into issues. And the issues always centered around this forces getting in the way of each other, canceling each other out. And the forces are a forward movement that the startup continuously needs to have. And the other is the collective force of the founding team or the founders, the co-founders, to then move in the direction of the force. If that movement is not aligned, number one, there is loss of energy, which is very precious for a startup, because it's limited and it's available only for a short period of time. But the maximization of conversion, of impact, achievements, forward movement, which is very important for startups to show, can get compromised because that team is not moving in the direction that has been set. So in my evaluation, sometimes I even did not check if there is a key, and why that was a mistake is because um, I've realized over time that even amongst founders, there is hesitation in stepping up to become a key. And that is a step up because the key has to make the most sacrifices and take on the biggest risk as well in order to be called the key. So it is not just a nice pedestal to sit on, it's also the maximum in terms of what it takes from you. So it's as most things in life, there is a price to pay. You're not just designated a key for no good reason. And over the years, I've seen that the most important things that keys do is to set the next destination, the next milestone. I've given a marathon analogy also in the book, where you're running that in a desert, right? And
Absolutely.
you're free to choose how far you want to run, but it's very dependent on how much water resources are you going to access as you reach that water point. So that direction is what the key will set. And what then follows him into the desert, while Sahara is having floods as we speak, but assuming Sahara 50 years old, the desert is an unfriendly place. It's a dry place. Water is not something you find easily. So, the key is setting that blind jump into darkness for a bunch of people who need to then trust that instinct that the key brings in. The key puts everyone at risk based on whether they choose a milestone which is too far, too difficult. But what works best in startups that do well is that there is a broad alignment on what that milestone is. Right? It's a very tricky thing for the key to do, but the key sets the forward motion based on the resources that they are almost guaranteeing will be put in place for the rest of the team. So it's not a kamikaze mission. It is something where the key is saying, I will be responsible to make sure the lights are on. And the key, if there is no external financing, the key will be the first person to mortgage their house, to take a loan against jewelry in the house. They will be the ones who will draw on the last resources available to them to make sure that the milestone they have set has the resources available for the rest of the team to then work upon. So there is a heavy price to pay for the key, but and that's why I sometimes see that amongst teams there is even lack of everyone's scared to be the key, or right, and if there is, it's a great thing because somebody has taken that upon themselves to carry that risk and to make sure that they are going to take the brunt of it not getting achieved.
And would you say that a team without a key actually is lacking some sort of a supercharged engine, which is absolutely essential for moonshot kind of ventures?
100%. Actually, not even for moonshot, for any startup journey, which is always a journey in the land of the unknown. Right? There is really no landmarks. There's no map. It's just you go into the wilderness with nothing in hand, and every startup takes a different journey. The twists and turns are new every day. So um what the key or the lack of a key can do to a team is, I've seen teams go round and round. Resources are burnt out, cash is spent, and the forward movement is very little. And the over a long span, over the arc of the life of the startup, you can actually almost see that there was a big stake in the ground that the key decided to put. And then the startup moved from one big leap to the next big leap to the next big leap. And by the time you see the 5, 7 years go by, that uh, that is so much distance covered in terms of achievement. And that's when you start seeing valuations which are your unicorns and unicorns, because it's every year or two there's a massive jump that is decided. How far you jump is decided by the key. So lack of a key actually is basically missing out the biggest generator or engine that you can have, which is going to take it forward. So yes, that's clearly a miss, for an investor also, if there is no identifiable key.
Okay. You've written in the book, for most people who have spent a few years in the business world, something that is rational is considered positive and long term, while something irrational is looked upon as negative and short term. A founder's mind alternates between the rational and the irrational as they move from short term to long term goals. Someone else might frame that as being able to incorporate both right brain and left brain thinking, where the right brain sets emotive, aspirational, the so-called irrational goals. And keeping this in mind, when you also discuss the concept of a good delusion as a key trait for achieving these ambitious goals, as you said, put a stake in the ground. What are the potential benefits and drawbacks of a good delusion, in quotes, and how do entrepreneurs harness it effectively without actually losing touch with reality?
Yeah, super. Great question again, Devanshu. So I will quickly explain for the benefit of the listeners. Every startup has to go through the rational part. The rational part is really where you are doing what I feel is the base minimum of proving that what you're bringing to the world actually works. It could be as simple as you said, my product will do this for a customer. And in the rational part, you actually build the product, the customer uses it, and the customer says, wow, I like it. And that rational phase or part can take different lengths of time for different kinds of startups based on what they're trying to achieve. So somebody could go around setting up a solar plant, which could take 2 years. Somebody could build a mobile app, which could take 2 months. Somebody could send a rocket, and that can take 3 years. So the rational part is always there for every startup journey, and the lengths are different, but it has to be followed by the irrational part. Now, the irrational part, like you said, is something where we start looking down upon it, because are you losing your mind? Are you delusionary, and etc. But the most important journey of a startup, again, from a mega achievement or for a mega founder, is that irrational part. Most founders are able to achieve, uh, you know, 50% here and there, the rational part, but only the mega founders actually go to the irrational part. And they do it in such an amazing way that what you see at the end of 5, 6 years is a size and a scale and an impact which is way bigger than anyone imagined on day one. And that irrational part is what requires a delusion, as you said, which is good delusion, because when you are sitting with, the basics proven, you don't have 100 million in the bank that, some investors come and given you. Thinking of, I will go to a different country, I will go to 50 million customers. Those are very, very delusional things, right? It's like there's no logic to why suddenly you will go from one town in India or three towns in India to the entire country. or why from India you will go to the rest of the world. That is the irrational phase where you're really saying, you're basically letting, and I was having an interesting conversation with a founder recently where I was asking the founder is going through a tough time, uh, as is not very uncommon. But I was asking, why are you doing this? What is it that is allowing you to mentally and physically take so much pain that you're going through right now? What are how does it get justified? And what I was trying to get at is really, what is your ambition? And, we can go into why that ambition is there in the first place. But um, what do you want to achieve is a very big question for the key. And like, what do you want to prove and to whom? And again, these are parts in the book. We need not touch it, but these are very important aspects of why even bother, right? So the the delusion is something that is a skill which, when used well, number one, helps you think through the irrational part, because you absolutely are delusional at that point in a good way. But when we talked about the key setting the milestone, which is way out there, it is done in a delusional state, in that irrational part, right? But that's what's giving you this big outcome, this big unicorn, which will
Yeah.
have tens of millions of customers. But if you at that stage start saying, "Oh, I will only do, pan India growth if I have VC funding. If I have 50 million, I will go to the rest of the world." Then it's not the right way to think, in my view, because then you're still being too logical. You're not being delusional. When you flip it to saying, "I'm so ambitious as a founder, I am going to go to the rest of the world," then what you will attract are, two very important parts of this puzzle. One are folks who believe in this massive endeavor. So you will attract people who are willing to step up to a massive endeavor. Number two, you will, as investors, most of us also are looking for the really big outcomes. We are aware of
Yeah.
all the challenges in some ways and shape. All startups get affected by the same uncertainties, the same headwinds. Uh, so you can say the probability of success for any startup, any two startups, let's say, is 0.1, right? There's a 90% chance of failure. But one is $1 billion outcome and one is a $50 million outcome. And it's very simple to figure out, if an investor feels that way, with the same probability of loss, they would rather back something which can be a very big outcome. So that irrational part, you really, the second and part of the puzzle you draw in is the big check, the massive check, which is actually meant to go win the world. So that's a good part of delusion. And of course, the wrong side of delusion is really where, um, one, you're not hearing people around you. You're able to shut out the naysayers, which is a good thing, but you're also shutting out in the process people who you should be trusting, who should tell you that, yes, you are being delusional, but that's okay, right? Versus
Sure. So
thinking that,
we
yeah.
come back to that because I think that's something which is very important. I'd like to come back to that a little later in the conversation. But you mentioned this the need to prove themselves, and I'd like to pick up on that. You mentioned that keys often choose the most difficult part to prove themselves, and you provided some childhood examples and experiences of perhaps constructed personalities, but so be it.
And
Uh,
perhaps not.
Perhaps not. And yeah, I mean, it would be great if you could have some names, but I understand the need for discretion. But do you believe this drive is essential for building a $1 billion company, or can it be, I mean, is it something which is kind of preceded early in life, or can it be developed later in life? Because we also have this, and I'll come to that. I'd like to explore that a little bit in terms of, groups of entrepreneurs who have access and don't have access. But is it something which is you're born with, or it develops very early in childhood, or is it something which can happen later as well?
So I think, Devangshu, at least in my data set, the founders who have made it really big, we're talking about multi-billion dollar outcomes, they've always had something that set them on the course to basically have a massive need to prove. And that need has started showing itself up on, an IIT JEE rank, or cracking a very tough interview to begin with, and a BCG Bain becomes like, yeah, I just did it, no big deal. And they have uh, performed extremely well on competitive sports. And so for them, it's almost like a breakfast, which is
The personality
just,
trait which they have very early in
yeah.
life.
And that um, I think that is a necessary ingredient. It sounds very common, but what we're talking about is, a very, very high need to prove. Uh,
Mm,
and again, the childhood part of that is um, where the stressors have, which every child will experience in their lives. Um, Teachers who are not kind, or whatever, some issues at home, etc. Their go-to when they're dealing with that stressor, their go-to is something that they're really good at. And that gives them that confidence that when supported by a very, I guess, emotionally supportive adult, could be anyone, could be a, coach or a teacher or a uncle, aunt, parents, could be anyone. When that combines together, what it builds in the, for a long lasting effect is an ability to cope very nicely with stressors by doing what you're good at.
right.
So the agency of controlling the world, or the innate belief that I have agency, comes from the fact that in your childhood you were able um, to deal with those stressors, cope with the stressors very nicely, better than anybody else around you. And that agency concept is what carries founders to building very large outcomes. And I think that agency origin is this, but it carries forward um, that need to prove, which has come from something where, usually it's um, something that you've been deprived of, right? So, but obviously there is no quantification to that, right? It's not like you were deprived of, you don't have a car, or your parents don't live in their own house, so there is nothing. So because if that was it, and that's where I cannot fathom beyond a point, because if that was it, then most founders will stop build, after they built a 10 crore company, right? They don't need to keep building 1,000 crore company or 10,000 crore company. So what happens between achievement of that uh, base need satisfaction, and to this, then beyond that, obviously you can satisfy that need 100 times over. What happens between that, I think, is more momentum.
Right.
It's there is no real, nobody is going back and thinking, hey, am I done now? Most founders will say, I don't think like that, right? They're just thinking of what now seems to be their destiny, which is to build the biggest company and to have the biggest impact, etc.
Sure. So you also spoke about the need to control outcomes. Uh, how can this desire for control be both a strength and a weakness, and how can entrepreneurs learn to delegate without actually sacrificing their vision? When we talked about the team and co-founders, uh, how to balance that? I think that's very difficult for somebody who wants to control the outcome and prove themselves. How do they let go of things?
So I think it's is generally a good thing. I mean, I would not see any founder who is not wanting to control outcomes. So I
Mhm.
think it's by design, it's a default mode. Uh, the as you said very correctly, the negatives of that would also come in along the way as you're trying to scale, right? Where you need to delegate, uh, and I would say, again, I've not seen any startup, even it's a seventh, eighth, ninth year, where the hardest problems are not coming up to the founder again. If they just reduce, they become harder and harder. Earlier, the founder will solve 100 problems a day, out of which 90 would be mundane problems, but nobody else around them would know how to solve, and they would want their DNA in every problem. And as it gets further along, those 900 problems become 20 problems, but 5 are super hard. And nobody else can still solve them. So delegation is just not possible when you're running like a founder. And obviously, I'm a big believer in founders continue to run their companies. But what is needed in order to do that is that they have also grown to run now, a $500 million revenue company from what was a zero, and a career which possibly was working as a junior person in a startup. And from there, in 7 years, you're running a $500 million company. So the growth needed in a founder's mind, even if they're succeeding, it's a good problem, but it's a massive journey, right? Of taking, and that's why I come back to why it's so fascinating. If you're successful, now you got different problems of, and then trying to control, I don't think can be taken away. But what I've tried to communicate through the book is there are um, um, there are two sets of people who you always will have around you. One will be the ones who will always believe in you blindly. They just need you to be honest with them. And the second set of people would be the ones where they will not care about your words as much as your logic. Like if you tell them why, logically this needs to be done, and if they're convinced, then they will put in blood, sweat, tears into achieving that. These sets of people are obviously what you need in more and more quantity as you get to the larger size of this, $500 million. So controlling everything is, first of all, coming in the way of accommodating very high quality thinkers. And if you are thinking on their behalf, that's one way to operate. And of course, in the old world, the single owner companies used to be like that, where I've actually heard this from somebody who was a founder, but they were still operating in the old world mode, that I don't need people to think. I just need people to do. Right. So, but I don't agree with that, because there are some, what you can get them to think, you will be very blessed as a founder if that list of 100 things that flow up to you reduces and only the higher impact items come up to you. It's not a good thing to control those 90 mundane things just because you have been in the past. So the trajectory of what are you solving for? Number one, you will always be solving for something. And number two, you should not grudge that, oh, somebody is now thinking and solving for this problem. So I think in terms of control, giving up on every decision is a must for scale ups. So founders fail to scale because exactly this, which is they're not trusting enough, or they're not giving up enough control to other people.
You referred to the marathon analogy earlier in the conversation, and I'd like to just quote something which you've written in the book, and then we'll kind of come to a couple of questions that I had about that. You've written, mega founders train for the marathon, but run it like a sprint. Let us not confuse a startup's journey with the speed of a marathon. Investors love faster return on capital they have put into a startup. India is unique in the lack of appreciation for the opportunity cost of growing startups. Many investors have not seen an exit from their 10-year-old investment in startups. When asked how long they have been waiting, they let out exasperated groans. If the founder comes to work every day thinking that their build time is 10 to 15 years, then they will miss many of the rewards that come with speed. There is a good chance that the outcome won't be attractive in size. A marathon mindset is the appreciation that the business is being built to last long, so every brick needs to fit snugly. The marathon mindset helps to prevent burnout and reduces the baggage load of a startup. So, I mean, it's telling actually the fact that you refer to other VC conversations saying that they've not found an exit. One question I have in my mind, I've had for several years, is the practical build-up time frame seems to be longer in India than in the US. Does the VC funding structure actually allow for this difference, or is there a danger that we are actually driving dysfunctional behavior amongst founders or founding teams, given the pressures of a VC fund which is closed-ended?
We are uh, actually getting pushed in India, um, and kind of doubling the problem here, because US startups are actually mostly solving for a technology gap.
Mhm.
And those by default are time bound, because if you miss building something in that time frame or getting the momentum in the time frame, you're pretty much done. There is really no redemption if you're 2 years too late to the market. In India, most of the problems we are solving for in the venture funded world are execution problems, which are aided by technology. So technology helps you scale faster depending on how much tech you use. This by nature is a very long, and it's a what I've seen again in some of my investments, the after 8 years of build, if the value has reached 100 million, in the ninth year it will reach 500 million, in the 10th year it'll reach a billion. Right. So in the last 2 years, you've added more value than you've added in the first 8 years. So staying longer actually is something that is needed even more for India.
Right.
But the way, so there are two parts to what you said. One is the investors do tend to not understand this and set fund lives which are smaller than 10. I mean, 10-year fund life is standard, right, for US. In India, there are funds which are 7, 8 years in the venture space. So I just don't understand how that can suffice, because then you are certainly selling in that first 8 years, if you're lucky. And the second impact of that is your you're being number one. I don't think there should be investors can make a founder run faster. They can give them more money and and encourage irresponsible behavior by
Mhm.
saying where's the growth, right? That is really the disservice that an investor can do to their startups by demanding when the bank balance is very large, they are actually coming at it by giving a large valuation themselves. Now, the investors and this is obviously all of 2021, where here's the big check and now your valuation is suddenly some crazy number, but now I'm going to go back and ask you for growth which will suffice or match up to that valuation that I've just given you. So it's really reverse, right, in the way you're thinking. And what this marathon mindset is exactly to this point, which is a good founder, a mega founder will always want to move fast. There's a
Mhm.
separate chapter on momentum, makes momentous things. So that again, I'm treating as a default. You do not want to have the best people get hired by some other startup. You don't want the best investors to go away to some other startup. So you want to be gaining the market, appearing and doing things on the double. But in your mind, the way you're building is not a company that's going to live for 3 years, because that's not the life. A lot of founders get into this without realizing that this is a long journey.
Right.
And the downsides of thinking it's a short journey is, number one, they exhaust themselves. They need to sustain energy over 10 years while they're getting older. So a 25-year-old founder will become a 35-year-old founder, 35-year-old founder will become 45-year-old founder. A lot is different between these two age bands. And they need to sustain the energy, because it's very hard to then say every day is day one, right? Which ideally should be the case.
Right.
The relationships you burn by not being fair to people, by not keeping promises. You don't think they will come back and bite you, because you'll be in and out in 3 years. And that's not what happens. It does come and bite you back. From things you tell investors, which you think people are going to forget very quickly, they stay in the system, they come back and bite you. So the mindset has to be that everyone's here for next 10 years. I'm going to see the same faces. I'm going to rely on the same people. And hence, the way I'm building the relationships, the way I'm building my systems, I'm preparing for growth, I'm preparing for scale. So again, if I was thinking I will never scale, then what you asked before, which is, will I ever, teach myself to let go? or to not have control over everything, I will not have the motivation to, I say, I'm going to run such a tight ship or run such a tightly controlled company. And I can see next 2 years, I can sustain that. But when you think 10 years, you will know immediately you cannot sustain that kind of control.
Absolutely.
Right. So that realization won't come until you have a marathon mindset. But speed is a totally different, the amount that a founder needs to cover in a day is really what's determining success. So, I compare that to the Mongol army, right? You're at an or Alexander, you're attacking, everything is fast.
Right. Right. In the marathon mindset, I think there are two questions which, and you mentioned stage of life, age, as we go on. One is how does the marathon mindset influence the key entrepreneur's approach to handling setbacks and maintaining that motivation and energy over the long term? That's one part. And the second part is actually much more intense, I think, the possibility of burnout. So one is the motivation part, which is got to be kind of constant. Focus on the burnout, just kind of giving yourself so much to the startup. So, yeah, I mean, what in your observation of, let's say, the key entrepreneurs in the big ones, how do they handle? How do the best ones handle this?
I'm referring to a conversation I had with the founder recently where company is getting walloped. It's something where I would say after 5 years of working very hard, in 1 month you can disappear, right? And you're in that phase where you're questioning why did you waste 5 years? And this founder is super calm, and they're not really getting very. And I asked, what's going on? How come? I would assume that you're very frustrated at this point. So why aren't you boxing the wall? And he said, I've learned to keep a very calm exterior. And my question was that are you, I've seen most good founders actually not have this calm exterior. They actually feel the pain. Uh, and, and I think most of us also get Gita wrong. When it says don't worry about the outcomes, we what we do is we tell ourselves that I'm not going to care about the outcome.
Right.
Because if it doesn't happen, I will care less about how bad I feel.
Right.
Right. So most of us actually, if our emotions are like a pendulum, we'll try and reduce the swing on the disappointment or the upset side because, we don't want to deal with that.
Yeah,
But
but when the pendulum, you reduce the swing on that side, it reduces on the other side as well.
we
It's just
stop feeling as much as we should be. And I'm saying most founders, most mega founders don't do that. They actually feel every emotion of, um, the disappointment, the massive upsets, the fear. I know mega founders who would still throw up before $1 million, $100 million pitch. It is something which is very important for them to achieve
right.
their goals, but it's not like they're being super calm. Uh, they're feeling the emotion. So burnout is first of all, um, can be a very camouflage thing where you are not realizing you're burning out, but you are. And a good founder or a mega founder who has to, continue with their journey for a long time, they will not try and achieve that by just by blunting their emotions. They will actually feel everything. Bouncing back, I've seen founders actually take time out after some massive fall. They will scream and shout and bite heads off, and then they'll come out and it'll be completely fine. So they are not ignoring that something has happened. They actually do it in a limited period of time, but when they come out, it's like, okay, let's start again. These are nice. Shouting, screaming is something which can make it toxic beyond a point, but it's a in some ways it's healthy for them to get over that negative emotion. And I've seen people do that mostly with founding employees, people who they can trust, or with co-founders who know the stakes involved. You know, if you are taking it off on somebody who has no relation, no stakes in the game, they will not even understand why you're so upset. So, I've seen founders do that, and it works for most people. And in the others, um, um, there is a theory that I've seen a lot of founders use, which is how they describe the words they use to describe the fall. Uh, right? What I've seen is that I spoke to many founders about this, and what I saw commonly is that, and you can call it lack of acknowledgement, but it's the words they choose. Say they will not say, "Oh, disaster has happened." They will say, "We'll hit a temporary roadblock," or "There is something unexpected that has happened." So this is not just because they're speaking to an investor, but also in their mind, the way they're sizing up, or for somebody who's not on a startup journey, what I would do is I will use very loose words, that, "Oh my God, something very, very bad has happened." And what I'm not realizing is that in my mind, then the size of that problem is actually exactly how I'm wording it. So because the founders have to deal with so many of these, and the brain is only so much, they cannot give massive size to every problem. So, a very cool thing I've seen a lot of founders do is they give it very appropriately tiny boxes in their heads and say, and you can call that delusion also. That,
Sure.
oh, they're not acknowledging the problem to the extent that it is. But what they're really doing is they're not trying to uh, you know um, they're trying to protect themselves from the stress that a big problem can cause by calling it a small problem. So that's one more thing I've seen. So I think burnout um, is something that they're exposed to all the time. But bouncing back chapter actually talks about a lot of the techniques I've heard mega founders follow in order to.
I'd like to actually, yeah, I'd like to bring that up. I mean, resilience is something which is one of the most treasured qualities in life
Mhm.
generally. And I think it's one of the most valuable for startup founders, given, the ups and downs of the startup's journey. And you explored the concept of Shoshin, or the beginner's mind, as a valuable tool for navigating startups and embracing new opportunities. Uh, how have you observed this kind of shaping perspective on success, failure, uh, keeping on the path, and kind of getting up after the fall? uh, how do and how can entrepreneurs cultivate that beginner's mind amidst the pressures and the complexities?
Yeah, so this was again something I've seen a lot of founders do. Um, it's a Zen concept. Um, it's the opposite of what an expert will suffer from, which is, hey, I already know this. And a founder who's been doing it, especially for a founder who's been doing it, it's much easier in the first 1 or 2 years. But when you think that, hey, I've kind of solved most of the problems, I'm now a seasoned founder, uh, and then you get, hit in your face by something. Your brain can work in two ways. One is, how did this happen to me? I'm so experienced, and in my way of how I've dealt with in the past, this is how I will deal with it. So this has worked 4 out of 5 times for me. I'm going to do the same thing the fifth time. And what you're doing in this is, you first of all, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, saying that you are, you know, now that you're in your fifth year of starting up, your the shock should be less and less, right? And the problem should not happen to you. But in the social mindset, um, in that beginner's mindset, the way you will look at a problem is very different. The way you will solve the problem will be very different, because you're not saying, I am supposed to know this problem. You will say, I have no clue. Let me look at this problem as if it's a new thing that's happened to me, irrespective of whether it's happened 10 times to you before. So you could um, You could pick any problem. It could be a new regulation, or it could be um, a market related problem where you're losing customers at a certain rate. And the way your solutions elegance is going to be measured is how freshly you've thought of that at this time. So um, I've seen founders actually have a very childlike attitude. So for them, a customer conversation is a very fascinating thing, even though it could be the 117th or 1700th customer they're talking to. Uh, and that is super rejuvenating. I've not seen that fail ever. Dipinder Goyal goes to drop packages off even now in a public company. Um, and I think the feedback that comes is one thing, but just the joy of having seeing a customer when you're part of a 25-30 billion dollar company, you're further removed from your customer, right? But that energy that the customer gives you in that interaction is amazing. So I've seen that a lot of founders do, which is go and meet your customer and hear from them what you're doing for them. And that's a great medicine for any burnout.